Hi there, gang, and welcome to episode 2 of the RSC Central Podcast, where simmers of yore sit in a grizzled room and talk about darkness. I'm John Denton, and with me I have Simon Croft and Tim Wheatley. So Tim, we tried to make this a monthly podcast, but it's coming on for nearly 2 months. We've all been a little bit too sick to get together.
Yeah, it's I still am a little bit phlegmy now. It's been this ongoing thing where I've just had a lot of difficulty clearing it up, and my lungs haven't been too good for the last couple of years anyway. So yeah, it just takes me a little bit longer to get rid of a cold now, and my kids just bring them home every single week.
The never-ending phlegm nightmare. How are you doing, Simon? Are you recovered from all your maladies?
I too have been on the child-induced phlegm express, and I'm on the. I'm definitely over the peak of a chest infection, but it's like Tim. Once you get to a certain age, these things seem to linger around for a lot longer. So I'll apologise in advance for any coughs or throat clearing.
On and on they drag. Yes. So Tim, what have you been simming recently?
I've been going back to Grand Prix Legends. About a month ago, I posted a video on the RSC Central YouTube where I had done some hot laps in the Honda on every single track, and I'm now doing the Cooper, and I'm going to go through every single car, do some hot laps on every single of the original Papyrus tracks. I feel like I got right back into the groove straight away. It just felt really natural, even though it was the Honda that everybody else seemed to despise.
This is with an unmodded version, so technically in a Murasama.
Yeah, it's I did install the GPLEA visual mods.
Okay, so that names it as a Honda, doesn't it? Within the okay.
Yes, it does.
What was the original name for the Cooper before?
Coventry,
that's right. Yeah. I used to find the Honda. I mean, I'm going back a bit because I haven't driven GPL in quite a while, but I used to find the Honda quite sort of tame and pleasant to drive. It just wasn't fast enough.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had issues because it had a lot of power, but it was also really heavy. So it was a big kind of momentum car, whereas with the Cooper, you can kind of throw it around like it's a go-kart.
Yeah, the Honda, I recall, had a lot of weight over the rear axle, and as a result, it would understeer quite a lot. It didn't have the same front-end response as some of the faster cars. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of can get around it a little bit. You can throw it sideways like it's a rally car. As long as you have the right feel for it, you can catch it and you can use that.
Yeah. Well, I've been playing with iRacing a bit recently with the Dallara IR18. Definitely not an Indy car. It's quite a lot of fun, but on the retro front, I put in some time. I mean, it's probably nearly a month ago now, but I put in some time on revs for you actually, Tim, because of course I put together those laps in revs covering the tracks, getting in hot laps, and I have yet to do Snetterton. The main reason I've been taking so long to sort this out is because I don't really know Snetterton very well, or certainly in its 1980s guise. And all the other tracks, Alton Park, Brands Hatch, Donington, they were and Silverstone came much easier because I know those tracks so well. And I think I seem to remember in the distant past, in the 1980s, I'd spent nearly all of my time in revs on the Silverstone, even though we did get the additional track pack. I think I stuck with Silverstone because I knew it, and it seemed too much effort to try and learn a new track. But yeah, I'm still getting there. I'm not ready. I need to get my time down because I looked up the original, as with all of these laps, looked up the original lap times set by David Hunt, was it, in the Ralt RT10 at the time, and I think it was the 1983 British Formula 3 Championship. So I'm looking to try and match his lap times or his qualifying times to do these hot laps, and I'm still I think I'm about 3 seconds off, so I've got some work to do there.
Yeah, I think when you originally did the previous hot laps for me, it was really nice to see how well the times matched up with the real world times, and obviously I posted that video on the Racing Central YouTube as well of some real Silverstone footage side by side with footage from the sim, and the track matched up amazingly well also. So yeah, it's really, really nice to see how that can be, and that you are obviously genuinely a couple of seconds off.
How easy do you find it, or how hard is it learning a track you don't know so well in that environment, where obviously it doesn't have the graphical fidelity and reference points that you would have in something like iRacing today?
It's a lot harder because you don't see as much, obviously, and it's really hard to necessarily judge the right line to take through a corner, and so it takes just doing more laps and having to sort of trial and error it a bit. The track, they have signs up on the track, so you've got like the braking markers, just I think say 3, 2, 1, and you will also have a little sign marker that points to the left or points to the right, or there's one for a hairpin as well, that at least let you know which direction the next corner is going to be going. But the biggest difficulty is fast corners. Like as you learn, you go, oh well, I've got a left-hander here, I'm going to slow right down, trundle round it in second gear. Actually getting to the point in faster corners where you realise quite how fast you can go takes a lot, because like revs, for all its greatness, one of its weakest parts is when you reach the limit, you're kind of gone, and what you have to do is really work up to the limit, and you do reach a point where the car will sort of slide around a bit, and you can hold on to it, but yeah, when you're gone, and then you have to start from scratch again, so it takes you back to the beginning.
And you're not cheating like these modern YouTubers by using a steering wheel that you've emulated in, right? You're using keys?
Yeah, using keyboard, of course. Yeah, it's the only proper way.
Yeah.
So the keyboard has this strange, control to slip the clutch on the gear. So it's not the same sort of keyboard controls as F1 GP was, which were far more intuitive. Really, it's a bit weird to get used to, especially when you're changing gear, and when I went back to it in Snetterton, obviously the last time when I'd done those other 3 tracks, I'd put in loads of time and you get used to it, but when I went back to Snetterton, I was the changing gear stuff, like I kept changing up when I wanted to change down and vice versa, and it's just a bit non-intuitive on the keyboard controls, but you get there in the end. Okay, Simon, what have you been simming?
So, 2 titles I've played since we last spoke, and one I think crosses into the title of sim, and one definitely doesn't. So one is Wreckfest. It's a game I bought at Christmas, sort of for my kids, sort of for myself, just on the Switch. So playing it with a controller, and I find it quite an impressive title. There's clearly a lot going on under the surface. It's impossible, I think, to judge with a controller that doesn't have analog shoulder buttons quite how good a job it's doing on the physics front, but it's believable. It sucks you in. You can certainly kind of immerse yourself in it and really get into the swing of things. And then, yeah, slightly further away from the sim end of the spectrum has been quite a lot of time on Mario Kart 8, which trying to teach a slightly impatient 7-year-old the finer points of racing lines is maybe not the best task ever, but when they're about to be hit by a train or eaten by a plant, it makes it a bit harder. But yeah, that's been my fun. A lot of fun's been had, I'll say that much.
I presume in Wreckfest there's no trains or plants.
No, you can crash into each other on lawnmowers or in combine harvesters or various things, but you can also just get into something quite clearly resembling a real world car. There is quite a nice roster in there for someone of my my tastes. There's quite clearly a Mark II Escort in there, Datsun 240Z, etc., etc., and then some slightly more fanciful things.
It's kind of like a banger racing sim, though. To some extent.
It covers quite a lot actually. So some of it is pure banger racing, and in quite a sort of fantastical sense, figure of 8 racing on a motorized sofa. But then some of it's actually a lot more grounded in real life series. So a lot of it resembles kind of the Scandinavian folk racing scene, which is sort of a lower budget version of rallycross effectively. So it's bring what you've got, race it on these kind of mixed surface tracks, and in that respect it's definitely doing something that I've not seen in another sim, certainly out of the box.
It's worth mentioning, with you mentioning rallycross as well, the team that's behind Wreckfest previously worked on Rally Trophy, which was a decent historic rally sim, and they genuinely do have a background in kind of real simulation and everything like that. And I think Wreckfest is one of those titles where you could have more fun in that than almost anything else. It's very appealing. It's very easy to get into. I can race with it on a keyboard, no problem, on a laptop, because it essentially runs on a potato. It's like it's really a very, very, very nice game.
Does it have historic vehicles as well, like say any of the Rally Trophy type stuff?
There's a few that could be certainly put in that category. Yeah, they also have I think they have like winged sprint cars even, and like stuff like that now as well for oval racing.
So in the kind of core out the box, no DLC, there are things like, as I say, Mark II Escort, old Jags even, something resembling a kind of Mark I Toyota MR2. So you kind of and then some various sort of slightly more odd things. So sort of 70s, 80s type stuff. And then with the DLC, I mean, you end up with some quite ridiculous stuff. But there are some kind of, it then sort of moves into other series and stuff, and brings in some other kind of slightly more real world based things. And there's a real mix of tracks and stuff in there as well. It does offer a huge amount of experiences, and it's up to you a little bit sometimes to work around the game a bit to get the experience you maybe want from it. Like, you're not going to have a clean race against the AI, put it that way. So if you want it to be a very much focused on the driving, then you want it to be hot lapping and time trial on it, though bit of door-to-door contact does kind of actually emulate some of the real-world rallycross stuff quite well.
What I think is really great about the way that the gameplay naturally comes to this title is that you could quite easily just drive a clean race, with the odd kind of door bang and things like that. But there's this calculated moment where you can make this choice, where you see a concrete block and there's someone to your side, and it's just so tempting to just sort of slowly move over and make sure that they hit that, and gives you that nice little bit of clean air that you needed.
Outrageous.
There's a fairly comprehensive damage model going on, and you can change the level of damage to the point where one heavy front end smash and you're out. So in that sense, it is quite. You're not just smashing into everything willy-nilly if you don't want that to be the way it goes, and the same applies to the AI. But it's got various kind of like bonus tasks where it's like smash out 5 opponents in a race and stuff. So you can play it how you want it, and like you say, if you're getting a bit pissed off with a certain car that's kind of giving you trouble, then you can end it quite significantly for that car if you so please.
Are the tracks real tracks?
No, I don't know if any of them are possibly based either completely or loosely on real ones, but I think they're fictional. There is actually, because you brought in Rally Trophy, Tim, there is a old Rally Trophy stage in there. I didn't realise for quite a long time. It's when you delve into the sort of time trial mode, it's there. I don't think it actually appears in the kind of standard career core sort of path of the game.
Interesting. I seem to remember not paying it much attention because it wasn't really simulation-y enough for my liking. If I recall, there was no clutch simulation in there. Outrageous. And Mario Kart, as you find that it's a useful tool for teaching racing lines and such?
Not yet, but it's a good way to annoy your child by winning, definitely. And it's well suited to playing in the car whilst you're waiting for a big sister to come at a drama club than it is about teaching the finer points of car control and racecraft.
Fair enough. I do. The last Mario Kart I probably played was on the SNES. I think I seem to remember still beating most of my friends at the time by knowing what racing lines were. So I think it's got an element of that. Just hitting apexes and things like that. You still do a quicker lap time, but then you get somebody throws whatever it is they throw at you from behind, and
you get a turbo boost for doing the biggest drift and. Etc. etc. But
somebody's left a banana skin in the track or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of games in my Mario Kart was one of the first kind of car games I ever owned, and I remember I always used to try and play it like I was really racing a kart. So I'd go on time trial. There's no other cars. There's none of the banana skins, turtle shells, and the fastest way in general is still to apply, real world logic to it. Hit those clipping points, etc.
It's strange. You were doing with Mario Kart what I was doing with revs. All right. So as before, I've asked my two compatriots to bring a topic of discussion along. So let's start with you, Simon. What did you want to talk about today?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, the sort of subject I want to discuss is what I'd maybe frame as like untapped opportunities for simulations, which is suitably vague and meaningless, and I'll try and expand on that a bit before. I think the two titles I've just given maybe in some ways more Wreckfest to begin with. What I think is really interesting with Wreckfest is that it's basically putting you in some quite odd situations or situations you wouldn't normally have experienced in a simulation, albeit with a pretty solid physics engine and handling model. And one thing that I'm sure there might be some exceptions out there and you guys might be able to point some out to me, but by and large, when you look in or find realistic handling, realistic physics in some kind of car game, it's very much in a racing sim. It's in the same old environments of real cars, maybe fictional cars, fictional tracks, but it's never too adventurous with that. And in just thinking about kind of some of the things I've experienced. So, for example, playing Mario Kart, obviously some of the tracks are utterly insane. You're riding upside down on a rainbow and stuff, but actually some of them are. I play them and I just think this would be a really cool track to throw a rally car around. If I could have this track in Richard Burns Rally, for example, I would be incredibly happy to try and nail these ridiculous routes and corners and undulations and cambers and stuff. And I think just sort of more broadly, there are lots of applications where if you were to take real world physics, handling, etc., and put it in different environments and circumstances, there'd be a huge amount of fun to be had.
I think somebody's done Rainbow Road for Assetto Corsa as a mod, actually. I think one of the sims that Tim can probably talk about here to bring up is Jeff Crammond's Stunt Car Racer. Tim, you played that recently, haven't you? You played every old sim recently.
I play that at least once a year, and there was definitely a period where it was all I played. It was also remade as an R-Factor mod by Mad Cowie, I think his name was, who made a selection of the tracks and obviously the similar car and things, and it really had what can only be described as roller coaster tracks. I think actually one of them was named roller coaster. And there was movable parts in there. There was a drawbridge that went up and down, where if you hit it at the wrong time, you wouldn't make the jump, and if you hit it at the right time, you would. And yeah, I think there's definitely a place for games like that. And what's been really nice recently, iRacing just bought a studio called Orontes Games. I think they are. I think that they're a German studio, and they were making a racing game called Drag, which has just recently been renamed to Exocross, and it's got a really decent physics engine. The cars are interesting, the environments are interesting, and it does feature a lot of the things that I think Simon would be really interested in. And that actually is supposed to be a full release, so we're not actually that far away from that. And I think that might actually fill that little product gap quite nicely.
So, Simon, are you of the feeling then that, is the point that you're suggesting that the games should look at more fantastical or sci-fi settings specifically, or would you say, for instance, like a game that's like, say, Jalopy, but with a realistic physics implementation and a nicer driving experience?
So I'm very much not just thinking in terms of, Mario Kart tracks and stuff. For example, a title that lets you have to be driving a police car with realistic physics in a realistic environment. So, elements almost of Grand Theft Auto or Driver, which actually is a title that I think at the time had a pretty decent driving model, certainly in those tender years of mine on a PlayStation with a controller. And there's all sorts of kind of ideas. I was thinking, new Zelda just come out. I've been revisiting Breath of the Wild with my son, and John, and I think you and I have sort of mentioned something along this, or thrown some ideas around in the past, but I've made some brief notes here and put Zelda in a Land Cruiser. Some sense of basically, you're trying to explore. And I know there are titles like kind of Mud Runner and Snow Runner that give you an element of kind of open world with things to do. But I think, some kind of vehicle-based RPG would be an amazing opportunity. Or, I mean, again, just sort of something random that came to mind is if you've ever watched things like a show like The Walking Dead, imagine being in The Walking Dead, but actually you're driving your car through these hordes, but actually you've got realistic damage modeling and realistic handling. You're trying to kind of escape, but you're trying to preserve your car. We spoke last time about vehicle preservation and stuff. I just think there's all sorts of scenarios where I enjoy driving in the real world, and I enjoy driving in simulations, but I'm also the guy who, when you watch Toy Story 1, bemoans the physics of the RC car. And I think, why can't it be this kind of living toy, but it also actually behaves realistically in terms of physics? And I think I just feel the same with a lot of vehicle-based games rather than sims. It's like, actually, I don't think this it might be a bit less accessible, but you can get around that with all sorts of aids and stuff. I mean, Tim, you mentioned how easily you can play Wreckfest on a keyboard on a laptop. I just think there are a lot of applications of vehicles in games that would not be diminished by making those vehicles realistic.
Yeah, and I do think there is a market for that. Like, if you look at mods as a way to gauge interest, I think that Assetto Corsa, especially with traffic mods and things as well. There's the Pacific Coast Highway mods, and there's I think there's a lot of Japanese highway mods now.
Where there's a whole area in Osaka.
Yeah. So I mean, I do feel like there is genuine interest in things like that, where it's essentially free roaming. And yeah, you're right too. I don't really understand why a lot of games that aren't strictly driving games don't actually put a little bit more effort into the driving, or maybe license someone else's physics, or whatever they need to do to improve that when they're driving through hordes of zombies.
Well, I mean, as an example, Carmageddon at the time I think, had some of the best physics available. That was around the time of like IndyCar Racing 2, and the standard, obviously, of physics was of a certain level then. And, like Carmageddon gave you that Walking Dead type thing, didn't it? But are either of you aware of a game coming soon that I believe is called Pacific Drive? And it's set in
Nope.
It's set in a sort of post-apocalypse, and you have an old station wagon, and you've got to use that to go and get supplies or do X, Y, Z. You get there's a story progression essentially to deal with, and you have to you add upgrades to this car and strengthen it and things like that. And a lot of crazy things happen. Now, I mean, this looks really cool, this game, for a start, but I've seen quite a bit of footage of it, and what's clear to me is that the physics are very much at the level of, say, Grand Theft Auto, which I think, if you are certainly a mainstream game developer, you would say that the level of physics in Grand Theft Auto is as good as most people want it to be. And so people like us that want a maybe more realistic and solid driving experience are a relative minority in that sense. And, the millions upon maybe even billions of people that play Grand Theft Auto, probably the cars handle pretty well, pretty usably in Grand Theft Auto. And I think that sort of sets the standard for what a sort of more mainstream game might use.
Yeah, I do think I play Grand Theft Auto in a pretty weird way, but I think that you play it in a more weird way based on what you've told me.
So stop at traffic lights.
Yeah, you stop at traffic lights. But I do drive the cars in Grand Theft Auto in a kind of defensive way. I am not looking to take damage. I want the car to get where I'm going without having to stop and kind of carjack someone else and things like that. It's I do play that in what is probably considered a bit of a weird way, for sure, and that probably is the sim racer coming across.
Sorry, Simon.
I was just going to say, I think on your point about say Grand Theft Auto physics are as good as most people want. I don't disagree with that at all. I think you're completely right. I think what I would say is that making them more realistic doesn't necessarily mean making that game unplayable for most people. I think there's a car in Grand Theft Auto, you're driving around a city, is not need to be as hard to drive as, an Indy car in iRacing on the limit. You can have a pretty robust physics engine that's fairly simple, but it actually follows kind of realistic physical laws. And I think there's a big middle ground between the absolute extreme of physical accuracy and the basically, let's make a car that handles like an eraser.
Yeah, I mean the simple way to back that up is that I think anybody can drive an Indy car at like 90-95%, without having any issues at all. So
80.
Yeah, perhaps. If someone is going to drive in a kind of a reckless way in Grand Theft Auto, then they're probably expecting to crash the car anyway. So what's the difference almost?
Well, they're probably setting out to crash and enjoying doing lurid slides in the process. But yeah, I'd just like to add, of course, there isn't an Indy car in iRacing.
Of course, sorry.
For the any lawyers that are listening.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sort of agree in a way, Simon, that I would like sims like. I mean, I think when you mentioned SnowRunner, MudRunner, like I enjoyed SnowRunner for what it is, but where you mentioned, for instance, that there could be an RPG and story behind it. Usually, these are things that more mainstream games with larger teams are developing, and SnowRunner is obviously made by a much smaller team. So the sort of gameplay aspect is kind of basic, really. It's this sort of elite style. There's no purpose to what you're doing. You're other than, say, acquiring money to get bigger trucks and upgrade those trucks. and like, you know, the money that you acquire through doing jobs has no other purpose other than to build up your fleet of trucks. And so, you know, like you get, well, I get kind of bored of it after a while, because you're just sort of going through a gameplay loop that has a limited amount to it, and the fun is obviously getting stuck in the mud with your truck and trying to drag this trailer through here or whatever, and you know, you've got to go and dig this oil tanker out of a lake or things like that, which it's kind of cool, but like it, you know, I think you get sort of struck with this lack of purpose after a while, and so it would benefit, I think, from having more sort of story driven aspect to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can look at it two ways. You could take a game like that and say, could this be complemented or made better by adding more story in or whatever? But as you say, you know, questions of resources and stuff. I think you could also look at it the other way, and you know, in a way, I'm kind of saying, imagine if Half-Life 2 had good physics on the buggy, or imagine if in these games, I mean, it's kind of a point you made, Tim. Basically, if you've got a game that's got a vehicle in it, why can't that vehicle just handle slightly more realistically rather than just be kind of an afterthought, which is often how it seems to be? And then, yeah, maybe there's somewhere in between, which is you introduce a very new type of title, which very much has vehicles at their core as a mechanic of it, rather than it's one stage in a vehicle, or, you know, we're tacking a story on here or something.
But are you restricting your user base then to people that have got a wheel and pedals, or are you expecting that, you know, like, how easy is it to drive a high fidelity sim, shall we say, with a joypad?
Well, I mean, people can play Assetto Corsa, Wreckfest, and they're both titles that I think are, you know, undeniably sims in terms of their, you know, underlying engine and behaviour, and you can obviously add filters and assists and everything else. I'm not saying everyone has to be playing it as if you were on a iRacing league where everyone's adhering to the kind of strict kind of mechanicals and mechanical sympathies and everything else of a car, but rather just there's the freedom there to actually experience a more realistic vehicular element to it.
I think, you know, if you go back and you look at the history of the genre, I mean, you brought up some older titles. I mean, even the original Need for Speed was advanced for its time. You know, it had a reasonable physics engine. You were driving down a street with traffic. There was, you know, police and things like that. But it was, for the time, it was marketed as, you know, realistic physics, and
it was pretty good at the time. Yeah. For the physics that we got in Sims at the time. It was very good. The first Need for Speed.
Yeah, I think other than Papyrus, it was probably among the top 5 simulations out there. Yeah. And you know, that kind of gameplay, or that the player that would play that hasn't gone away. They've just been driven in different directions. And
well, I think that's a good example though, because the Need for Speed series is still with us, and the physics have, I wouldn't say deprecated, but they've changed. They've become more arcadey, essentially, and that was the direction that obviously the game designers chose to go in. And my feeling is that's to you know, bring in more of a player base.
And then when you had the Shift kind of branch of the title, it then just became another sim racing game. It wasn't what Need for Speed was in its kind of and its ancestors, you know, that thing. And then now you've got, you know, well, I don't know if it's really a present title anymore, but then you had like things like Burnout that became massive, which were, you know, effectively like Crazy Taxi. You know, it's just kind of, physics aren't a part of this, it's just get from A to B as fast as possible and smash as much stuff as you can.
But is it possible that a lot of people played that first Need for Speed in exactly that way, and that's what led to games like Burnout being developed?
There is definitely a kind of chicken and egg type thing, you know, which way were things driven there. But I do genuinely think that those players are still out there, and if they had to maybe turn down a difficulty level on the opponents so that they could drive within their own, you know, skill level, then I think that is a better option than dumbing down the physics so that they can always win.
Yeah, I mean, I think games like Forza Horizon service this need very well. I mean, the physics in Forza Horizon are not bad at all when you're in a situation where you're sort of driving a car down the road. But then they also let you get away with doing enormous jumps off things and, you know, landing and being fine and getting a high score flash up in front of you for achieving you leaped 500 meters with your car and now you're just going to drive off and it's completely fine. But like, no, there are some challenges in Forza Horizon. The last one I played was Forza Horizon 4, where it's like, you know, get round this circuit as quickly as possible, and it's a piece of road. And, you know, you have to really push the limits, and then when you start doing that, you realise that the handling's pretty good. You know, it's not got the, like I say, the fidelity of some of these, of iRacing or probably Assetto Corsa or probably Gran Turismo, frankly. But it's certainly at a level where I think the casual gamer plays it and thinks it feels like a car, you know.
Yeah, and that's what's really important when it comes down to it, is that if you drive the virtual car like a car, does it do the things that cars do? You know, you can certainly drive even what are considered to be top-tier simulations in an unrealistic way, and they will do unrealistic things. You know, that's part of the way to judge which ones are the best. But the more sort of simcade, arcade ones, those are terms that other people really use more than me. But those kind of titles, you can still do the simulation thing. You can still drive them in a real car way and get a real car out of them.
I mean, I think a great example of this is, for example, Damage, right? You could play any sim you want and have damage turned off, right? So you can put my son in it, and he smashes it up at the first corner, and then he just carries on and smashes it at the next corner, and so on and so forth, and he's going to get over the line. I could also play it, and I clip something or I have an off, and I'm like, get really angry, and then, you know, like, I don't just carry on smashing my way around. I try my best not to do that. So that's something that allows you to enjoy the kind of realistic physics and the driving experience, but it also offers a huge level of leniency to different abilities. And I think you
mean that you can turn the damage on or off.
Well, yeah, but or if you wanted, you know, because you were making, I think a point you were kind of getting at, John, was, well, if you introduce more realistic vehicle physics into a kind of more general game, is it then becoming like out of reach of people to play it, like more mainstream? And I guess the point is that you can have realistic handling, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to be punished realistically for, you know, failing to control it or drive properly. And I suppose what you could also say is, if you know, in terms of, you know, could people handle this without a wheel and everything else? Well, look at Gran Turismo and how many copies that sells and how many people play that on a pad. If people can buy that and play that in front of their TV on a PlayStation controller, there's no reason they couldn't drive one of those cars with that level of physics across a city, or couldn't be doing that in an RPG or anything else. Obviously, people buying it as a car game, but still, if that's selling millions of copies and is a serviceable thing.
Yeah, I mean, I get the point, and I think Gran Turismo in that sense benefits because it doesn't have car damage.
And that's sort of my point.
People I talk to about normal video games regard the physics and car handling in Gran Turismo as too difficult. And I would agree that there is a point in the game you can get to, you know, like when you start driving the faster cars and getting into the point, like in the late game, when you're driving things like LMP1 cars, the controller, unless you've got incredibly deft thumbs, using a controller at that point becomes very, very difficult to do. And I think you need to have steering wheel and pedals. You don't necessarily need to have a really good steering wheel and pedals, but just be able to have that finer level of control on the steering wheel and throttle. I think when you're in the early game and you're driving Mazda Demios and stuff, then that's different. And indeed, as you say, if you're driving around a city in that Mazda Demio, then that's going to be absolutely fine, isn't it?
Or Zelda and a Land Cruiser, you can't go wrong, you know.
You just hit the nail on the head there with your last comment, is that maybe the whole requirement for doing this is that people start off driving what would be considered a lesser vehicle that gradually builds their skill level.
Yeah, I mean, that's a dynamic that Gran Turismo has had since the start, hasn't it? And lots of people that very much take their sim racing very seriously object a great deal usually to having to acquire cars like that or having to work up, and they think they should be able to jump into the fastest car from the start. Personally, with Gran Turismo, for me, as far as I'm concerned, that's what the game is, and there's an awful lot of actual fun to be had. There's more fun, I think, to be had certainly in the mid-game when you're driving Porsche 911s and things like that, than maybe there is, because I think as well that their physics simulation, its issues are highlighted by stiffer, higher fidelity cars like LMP1 cars, or certainly the Super Formula car.
Yeah, I think skill level tiers actually work really well. Obviously, it even works for the things like iRacing. You know, you drive a Skip Barber, you drive a lesser vehicle before you drive a definitely not an Indy car.
Okay, well that's enough of that, Simon, all this unrealistic nonsense. Tim, what subject have you got? Hopefully we can talk about vehicle simulations.
Well, I am doing what I usually do. I'm looking back at how things have worked in the past. I've been going through and putting up a load of old press releases and old screenshots and things like that up on the website. And it's made me think kind of more and more of how things are marketed different these days compared to how they used to be, where sim racers would effectively wait sometimes weeks, sometimes months for a new screenshot of the upcoming title to be posted on the developer's website. You would get maybe a trailer, a single trailer for a title which was coming up. You might not even get that trailer posted online. It might be on a CD of a different game, and it was almost like a closed off world. And there was obviously a difference in how things were developed at that time, where it was a boxed product, it was finished, it was sent off to the stores, and now it's we do ongoing development, so it is a lot more difficult to be closed off, I think. But I'm just thinking about the pros and cons of all that, and going back as a bit of a retrospective on early R-Factor 2 marketing and times with ISI, how that didn't always come through as a positive, where there would be something that was licensed and announced, or something that was maybe in early development that was announced and basically never made it to the product. Those are the kind of situations that really never used to exist. And I just wondered what you guys think about how things were past versus present.
Well, as you say, in the past, a product would be developed as a whole thing rather than, this idea that you're marketing just a car or something like that. I feel like in these days there's quite an overload of this sort of thing, and things like you go to Twitter any day and it's like, we've got a big announcement coming at XYZ, and that big announcement is that they're adding a tree to one of the tracks or something like that, and you're like, oh well, we were all supposed to get really fizzed up for that, and then so that amount of overload does lead to a certain point where you're going, oh, we've got a big announcement. What's the big announcement? Oh, it's a Mini. Okay, well, I'm not that excited about that car, but so maybe some people are. But the sort of media hype that goes around everything in all of video games does extend to the sim racing world to some extent.
I think yeah, and it's hard for me to separate me getting older and more disillusioned with the world and people and stuff, but I've just basically gone completely away from looking at any previews. I don't look at any of this stuff. I basically wait, and then something's released, and if I hear good things, I'll have a look, and then if I think, yeah, this looks like something I really want to get on, then I'll get on it. It's not to say I kind of, I don't completely remove myself from exposure to news of new titles or new releases or updates and stuff, but I just don't believe the hype, basically. And it's not to say I disbelieve it. I just everything is the next biggest best thing, and it obviously all can't be. So let's just wait and see is almost my motto.
Yeah, I think, kind of thinking back through the timeline of things, the title that really kind of bridged the gap between old marketing styles and new marketing styles, or, old development types even, was probably both World Sports Cars and Racing Legends, because that was the first title that I remember seeing really early footage, really early screenshots, getting almost direct communication with the developers, having them answer individuals' questions on forums and things like that. And as what really, in my mind, was a first experience of that kind of open dialogue, it really didn't turn out that well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That was the time when I was, first sort of fully ensconced into this whole idea that we're really getting invested in the product before the product even exists. And in the past I'd been a regular reader of things like PC Gamer, but as you say, I think racing games probably got more coverage then than they do now in mainstream press, but still PC Gamer would, there would be maximum sort of a half-page preview about IndyCar racing, or I remember well with Richard Burns' Rally, in fact, that there was it was just a short, and there was literally one screenshot and a paragraph of text. And we didn't get much on the racing game front, so I never really got too massively excited. Usually you'd get a demo as well on the cover disc or whatnot, so we'd get a demo, and that's it. When the demo came out is when I'd get interested or excited about it. I remember playing an IndyCar Racing 1 demo which came on a cover disc, and Grand Prix Legends as well. There was a demo on the cover of PC Gamer. But with the Racing Legends, they set up a forum, they set up a website detailing everything about it, and it was nothing had been nothing had been made that we could actually drive at any point, and turns out never did.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned two titles there that give me complete opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of my approach to this and also my experience of it. So Racing Legends, it's like that first painful heartbreak you never quite get over.
That's why you're a curmudgeon now.
Yeah, I was a happy young man with his life ahead of me, and now I just bemoan the world. But no, I mean, I had a lot of kind of sympathy for the developers at the time, and sort of, I don't know, I guess still do looking back. But as you rightly pointed out, Tim, that, let's be honest, didn't quite pan out as planned, for whatever reason. But certainly for me, as a kind of potential consumer, it was basically one of massive hope and expectation, basically met with nothing. So it was a huge disappointment. But John, you mentioned Richard Burns' Rally, and I remember this was a title, and this was probably just due to me constantly being disappointed by every rally title ever released, was I just had zero expectation from it. I did not almost allow myself to get excited, because every time some new rally game was coming, I thought, oh, maybe this will be the one, and then it was like, no, it's not. So Richard Burns' Rally, I just refused to let myself get excited for. And then I remember hearing people sort of saying, oh, it does look really good and blah, blah, blah. And I was just kind of like, I just ignored it. And then when that demo landed and I played that for the first time, like, God, the sense of just jubilation. You know, I don't think I've ever been as pleasantly surprised by a title, possibly any genre, in my life, because I went from just refusing to have anything above zero expectation to being like, this is what I've been waiting for what, 10 years plus, like since I'd sort of first got a wheel and properly got into my simming.
So I do remember with Richard Burns Rally, in fact, before the demo, there was a video, possibly was on a PC Gamer cover disc, in fact. I remember watching the video and just seeing the way the suspension was moving in the cars and the way that the car moved over the road, and I thought, that looks good. That looks like it's going to be good. And, you know, it was a big step above, you know, what Colin McRae Rally looked like, which at the time was the previous rallying benchmark. And, you know, going back to the previous point, you know, Colin McRae Rally was more of a mass market title that appealed, you know, the physics were workable but appealed to a wider audience.
Yeah, I remember seeing that video, or a video, and I just remember sort of almost saying to myself, it's like, nah, they're tricking us, it looks good, but it won't be like that.
The irony, Simon, is that you and I were probably discussing it on the Racing Legends forum that very day.
We probably were.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you guys go back to that, because I've definitely been through those cycles of disappointment and, you know, kind of not letting myself be interested and all that. And then obviously I've been on the other side of the fence too, where I've been the guy who's been posting the videos and posting the screenshots and all that. And I think a big moment of realization where I kind of realized what I'd been doing a little bit was with Hello Games and No Man's Sky, which is a space game.
Yeah.
Where I had seen all of the interviews coming up, and I was really excited about the title, and their kind of lead person, or the mouth of their company, was kind of going out. He was on major TV shows kind of showing off his game, and what he was obviously doing is he was showing early builds, which were kind of test beds almost, and it really kind of didn't end up to be completely that gameplay experience. When you landed on a planet, it was usually desolate, which most of them were, and you didn't have dinosaurs walking around and stuff like that, like a lot, you know, like he'd shown, and it just really wasn't that overall experience. And then I thought about kind of what I'd done when I was at ISI, where, for example, I would go into the office, I would drive in there, it was like a 4-hour drive, and I would go there and I would work there for a day, like every month, and you know, kind of keep in touch and see what was coming. I'd sometimes be given footage and screenshots of upcoming features, and I would be told, you know, you can go out, you can post this, you can, you know, talk about this feature, this feature, this feature, and I would go ahead and do that, and then basically I would hear nothing for a few months, and then I would email the person that I know had been working on that, and I would get the answer that we weren't doing that anymore, or we weren't going to build that car anymore, you know, we weren't going to build that track, and there was a lot of historic Indy cars, for example, that I went out and licensed. There was Formula One cars that I got one from every single decade since 1950 that I had lined up for a license, and things just never happened. And I realized that I had done exactly the same thing as that guy from Hello Games, going on there, showing off the potential more than what ended up being in the actual product. And it's exactly the same thing that the West brothers did with you know, Racing Legends, with World Sports Cars, is they showed off the potential, and yeah, it just never came out.
John and I have been talking back and forth for, well, 6 months probably, talking about the new Zelda game coming out, and like, I think they're kind of like, I think the conclusion I've come to over the last few years is basically, unless it's Nintendo releasing a Mario or a Zelda game, it's just assume it's not going to be what you want it to be or what they say it's going to be, and then you can always be pleasantly surprised, and it's better to have that than disappointment.
I think, going back to the sort of modern way of doing things now in video game marketing as a whole, and specifically in racing sims, there are no surprises anymore because the marketing push is so big. So you have so many developer interviews, you have so many screenshots, videos. Somebody on YouTube gets to have a go on it and talk about it, and I pay a limited amount of attention to these things. But if you are, if you are really excited about a game, or in the case of the way nowadays with Sims, it'd be like a DLC being released. If you're excited about the new Assetto Corsa Competizione DLC, for instance, and they're adding 5 new cars, you will be able to find out all about them, and you will know everything before you've even downloaded it onto your own computer. And the difference to the way things used to be, the way we talked about with Richard Burns Rally or whatever, is that you'd read some things in a magazine, and that's maybe the extent of what you'd do, and then you'd get the game, you'd install it, and then indeed you might be disappointed, Spirit of Speed 1937, or you might get GPL, or you might get Richard Burns Rally, and like suddenly you find that your evenings are gone.
That's an interesting title that you just mentioned, which I just recently uncovered a lot of information about. With Spirit of Speed, the developers actually had builds that were far, far, far better than they ever released. And there are actually in public now. If you go looking for them, you can find them on the internet. There's on
the internet. Racing Central is where I would go for them, surely.
No, I haven't hosted them. I have downloaded them, so if they disappear, I will still have them. But I don't want to get in the way of the person who's actually hosting them. But yeah, there's a lot of different builds that are out there, and there's a lot of different executables, and there was a lot of realistic versions of that game that were developed, and they were fighting with their publishers, and they were fighting with executives on what they could actually release. And it's the same thing that happened with the kind of Grand Prix Legends engine, is that there was the higher-ups from Sierra and everybody there just didn't want to put the Grand Prix Legends engine out to NASCAR racers, because of the difficulty and the time that it would take that was a little bit extra to develop. And then obviously we had NASCAR Racing 3 that was cancelled and then released using the NASCAR Racing 2 engine rather than the Grand Prix Legends engine, for those reasons. And that was all kind of potential that we were actually shown. There was a trailer released of the cancelled NASCAR Racing 3 that I have on my YouTube. There's screenshots and things like that, and I just remember seeing the really early screenshots of that cancelled NASCAR Racing 3, where basically you could just see 2 wheels off the ground in the trailer and things like that, which is something you'd never seen before because they were always attached to the racing surface. And that's when you knew, oh my god, it has these 6 degrees of freedom, this is massive. And then obviously that never came out either.
NASCAR Racing 4 used the GPL engine though, right?
Yes, it did.
Was that under a different publisher?
It was under different ownership. At that point, Sierra had been bought out by, I think at that point it was Sendent, they were called. Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. So it did come in the end. And I do recall that it needed some development actually with NASCAR Racing 4. The engine didn't cope with the weight of the cars or something like that, but there was definitely a very very low tolerance for braking grip.
Yeah, they definitely improved the NASCAR simulation by NASCAR 2003, which was obviously the last title.
Yeah, the pinnacle.
Just thinking in terms of both of your kind of attitudes and thoughts, but also for you, Tim, being on sort of both sides of the fence of it, is that in terms of hype, expectation, marketing, etc., how do you feel that's changed with the sort of significant rise of things like early access and stuff, because what in my time in PC gaming, and this is quite a long time now, it's gone from titles shipped to titles shipped, and then you get little patches to fix little things, to titles shipped with the expectation there's going to be lots of patches that actually finish the game, and now it's more you actually get to start playing the game before it's even finished, and that's not always the case. Not every publisher or developer works in that way, but I think for me it depends very much on the title. Something like a car sim, I don't mind jumping on that in early access. If it was something like an RPG or something, I wouldn't want to go near it till it was finished, because basically you're spoiling the story, or you're spoiling the actual. It's like watching a half-edited film or something.
I don't touch early access anymore, unless it's maybe a racing sim. But with racing sims, again, if you're given one car and one track or something like that, then you've got a game, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm boring enough to just pound round and round. But something I was thinking the other day, and with a lot of sims, racing sims, and I think the same with flight sims, because I was thinking X-Plane 12 recently came out, and it feels like you need to give it a year to be fully baked. Like it's out, it's released, it has these features, but new features are being added. I think it was similar with Assetto Corsa Competizione. It released I think in early access for a while, and so there wasn't much, and steadily content was added, and now it's a pretty solid and complete game. Automobilista 2 similarly, it started at a certain level, and it's just continually been improved upon with every update. If you're there thinking, well, when's it going to be done? I don't know what the answer is to that is, because Assetto Corsa Competizione had an update recently that updated physics, changed things. iRacing's probably set the template for this, with the fact that every 3 months they put out a new build, updating this, that, and the other. And why wouldn't the other sims keep up with that? If they're finding new ways to develop it, then they're going to make changes to it. But in the past, obviously, like NASCAR Racing 2003 was released, and it was that, and there was maybe a couple of patches that fixed issues, but they never came along and said, "Oh, we're changing the physics."
Yeah, the way that a title is marketed is obviously completely related to how it's being developed and obviously released. With iRacing especially, they were historically very tight-lipped. They had continued from the Papyrus days, really, where basically you were almost going to be lucky if you got a trailer before the thing was released. I think with the recent Mercedes F1 car that they released, they didn't put out a trailer until 2 days after the car was out. And obviously by that point, the impact of a trailer is kind of gone. It is really interesting to see how early access kind of changes that too. With R-Factor 2, it was obviously a form of early access that it was going through. It was in-house that was called a beta version at that point, although that was just the name that was given to it. It wasn't really in that state, or those states kind of don't really exist anymore. Alpha beta is a very muddy term now. But it is interesting that just lately as well, I feel like iRacing have started to preview things a little bit earlier, and I think that is a change in marketing that we're seeing right there. With the Jerez track that was recently released, they put out a video that featured the what's called the ribbon, the actual racing surface, was actually modeled, but everything else was point cloud. So that's something that historically they kind of wouldn't do before, releasing the track before. You did have that with Long Beach, but that's because it was one of their tech tracks that they hadn't finished building. And I have noticed a little bit of a difference there that is kind of interesting, and I do wonder why they're doing that, whether that is more kind of that they want to dip into the kind of media outlets a little bit more often. They want to get more YouTube videos made about them by influencers, and kind of on that topic. I think that is kind of the way that we see titles marketed these days. Is that if something is given early access, it's almost the people in early access that are marketing it for you. They're making YouTube videos. They're tweeting about it.
Yeah.
That's the major difference between how things used to be and how they are now.
I mean, I think part of that with iRacing is probably that if you build up a little bit of fizz around the track or car being released, that you will get a certain amount of impulse buyers when on the day of release or in the first week of release, whereas otherwise the only reason to buy a track is if you're running a series that is running that track. So I am definitely an example of somebody that owns tracks that I've hardly ever raced on because I'm running series that aren't going near them. Or when I was doing lower license levels, maybe I haven't raced at Lime Rock for a really long time because I'm always racing cars that are a bit too big and fast for that track. But I can't sell Lime Rock now, can I? But but anyway, the fact is, if they were to release let's say Cadwell Park, again, I probably wouldn't. I would go, oh, that's nice, I like Cadwell Park, but unless I'm going to be going back into like Formula Ford or the Mazda MX-5 or something like that, then like pushing a big LMP1 car around it is not going to work on a track like that. So I'm not going to buy the track, and it's out of utility. Whereas I think maybe if I definitely bought Fuji Speedway on an impulse, though that is, to be fair, that is a track that's big enough for the cars I'm driving, but it hasn't actually appeared in any of the series I'm running yet. Whether it will or not, I don't know. But it's yeah. I think they're probably just doing that to get the impulse purchases rolling.
I actually have a question for you guys that I think might make some interesting answers, and we can probably close on this. But I kind of I'm going to talk about my experiences with this first, and then each of you can probably come up with your own answers on this. But in the whole of sim racing, I think it was probably the Grand Prix Legends demo that sold me something the most, for obvious reasons. It was a big step forward in physics. It was that first experience. It was basically impossible at first, and then obviously I kind of gave up and retried. But in gaming as a whole, I think there was a cover disc that had Frontier Elite 2's intro sequence on it. And in all of video game marketing, that's the thing that actually sold me on a product the most. Because I would actually go to bed at night with that looping over and over and over as a rolling demo. I would have my Commodore Amiga playing that intro over and over and over with it on. And that's probably the game that I've looked forward to the most. And it was such a simple kind of thing for them to do as far as marketing that title. But I completely fell in love with the game before I'd even touched it. Is there anything, John or Simon, that kind of hit you guys in that way?
I mean, I'll start by saying that I think that the way that you get hit by these things when you're a 14-year-old is very different to the way that you get hit by these things when you're old man like me. But I very much similar experience with Frontier Elite 2, to be honest. It was a game I was waiting for a great deal, and I was super excited about it. But I think the main thing, the biggest one in my mind is Formula 1 Grand Prix 1. And seeing the box art, and I don't know either. That's right. There was an advert it was pre-PC Gamer. PC Gamer as a magazine did not exist yet in the UK. PC Format was the magazine of choice at the time, which of course some will remember was not just about games and entertainment, but it also covered everything you could do with your PC. Basically, they had a full-page advert for Formula One Grand Prix, and it was basically just the box art with the it's a debadged Lotus 102D, I think. But basically, that was it for me when I saw, because I'd been playing Revs for many years, and I got into Indy 500 a bit, but I never really hooked with the oval. I mean, when I say a bit, I probably played it for like 50 hours or something, but like I'd probably played Revs for more than that, I think. And so to know that this was the next thing from the guy that did Revs, and also seeing that image of the Formula One car, knowing it was Formula One, I was super into Formula One at the time. So it was that for me.
I think I can probably give two answers, and they both had a similar effect in some respects. So I think one difference between you two and myself, apart from, I think the reason you two have this sort of exposure to a lot of the older titles than I did is that, like, I didn't grow up in a gaming household. There was no PC in the house or anything like that. So I was, I had my SNES playing Mario Kart, and then I remember I really wanted an N64. And I saw the previews of Mario 64 and pictures of all these games, Pilot Wings, etc. And I was like, yeah, I can't wait for this. And the N64 release was delayed. It kept being delayed, and I was just hanging on. And the PlayStation came out. I was like, nah, I want this N64. I'm waiting. And then I saw basically a magazine preview for the Formula One title by Bizarre Creations. And at the time, for me in console land, this was just absolute paradigm shift. It looked amazing, even though if you look back now it doesn't look quite so amazing, but at the time it looked amazing with the TV captions and everything. And so I literally went from wanting an N64 desperately and waiting to like, oh, I'm getting a PlayStation. And it was basically for that. And then similarly, I didn't really have much intention of getting a PC. I wasn't, I was a bit aware of the PC gaming scene. I'd been at friends' houses and sort of been on Doom and stuff, and thought, wow, this is very different to playing on the Super Nintendo or PlayStation. Bit before PlayStation. But basically, when Mobile One Rally Championship came out, that was it. I went and bought a PC pretty much to play that one game. And at the time, I was maybe 16, and my job was picking up rubbish at a service station, so I was not well flushed. But I basically went and took all of my savings and bought myself a PC and a wheel just for that one game, which actually turned out not to be very good. And that started my disappointment that ultimately led to the relief of Richard Burns Rally. But it's a good job it came out, because I bought a PC. It got me on the hunt for more and more, and got me basically into sim racing. So that was a pretty big. I basically bought a PC because of 6 pictures in Edge magazine and a review.
Cool stuff. Right, well, that's about all we got time for again today. You can get in touch with us to ask questions on the Race Sim Central Twitter feed or on the Facebook page, or join us on the Race Sim Central forums. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.